From Washington, D.C. to the heart of America, welcome to Mark Alford's America. I'm freshman congressman from Missouri, Mark Alford, and yes, I believe in America. I believe in you, and most importantly, I believe that our greatest days are ahead. You know, each week we take you behind the scenes here in Washington to share the stories, the news, the legislation, to meet the great folks who are helping shape our great nation. And one of those lawmakers is Admiral Ronny Jackson. Ronny paid his way through undergrad school at Texas A&M University, Gigamaggies. Following graduation from medical school at the University of Texas Medical Branch, he began active duty service in the United States Navy, reaching the rank of Admiral. He later went on to serve as the emergency medicine physician in Afghanistan and Iraq, where he was in charge of a surgical shock trauma platoon in one of the deadliest regions in the Iraq War. And later, he went on to serve as the White House doctor, White House physician for 3 presidents. He is now a fellow member of the Armed Services and Ag Committees with me. Please welcome Dr. Ronny Jackson. Ronny, good to see you.
Hey, Mark, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
I didn't know, should I call you Doctor, Admiral, or just Ronny?
Just Ronny, yeah.
All right,
yeah.
good. You got a great smile, by the way. What made you want to get into the medical field?
I don't really ever planned on getting into medicine, to be quite honest with you. The way that worked out was I was a marine biology major at Texas A&M, and I needed a little extra money. I was paying for my own education. I had enough to make ends meet, but I started dating my wife, and I needed a little extra spending money. So I went across the street to the University of Texas Medical Branch, UTMB, where I ultimately ended up going to medical school. But I went across there and just, tried to get I said, hey, do you guys have something I could do when I'm not in class to make a little extra money? They said, yeah, we'll figure something out. I figured they'd put me to work in a chemistry lab or something like that because I was a marine biology major. And they called me back a few days later and they said, hey, we got something for you. We're going to put you to work in the pathology department as an autopsy assistant. I was like, what? I was like, all right, sure, I'll do it. So I started working as an autopsy assistant, and it was kind of crazy. My job was to literally open the body up and take the organs out and pass them down to the end of the table, take the brain out and you pass it to the pathology resident at the end of the table, and they would dissect everything out and figure out why the person died. And they just started teaching me a little bit. They were like, hey, come down here and look at this. See this liver? And I was like, yeah, I remember the one you took out yesterday? And this guy's got cancer. Look at that. So they started teaching me a little bit. I got interested in medicine. Next thing I know, I was like, you know what? I think I want to be a doctor. And that's how it all got started. And I knew I didn't want to be a pathologist. I'd been a volunteer firefighter, worked around paramedics and EMTs a lot. So I kind of knew right away I wanted to be an emergency medicine doc. But that's how I got interested in medicine. I kind of scrambled, took the MCAT right at the last minute. Applied for med school and got in. And that's also ultimately what led me into the military because I didn't have money to pay for med school so I reached out to the military about the scholarship programs they had to pay for your med school once you got in. And I got on the health profession scholarship program where the military paid for 4 years of my medical school, and I owed them 4 years in return. And then I got in the military and just loved it and never left.
What was it like in Afghanistan and Iraq?
Well, I was a board-certified emergency medicine physician at that particular point, and I was OIC of the shock trauma platoon, part of a surgical shock trauma platoon, right on the battlefield between Fallujah and Ramadi. And it was professionally satisfying, because I was using the skills that I had trained in an environment where I felt like I was doing a lot of good. We'd have people that would come in. We'd have a lot of petty stuff come throughout the day, but on average we probably had 3 or 4 bad casualties a day. And these are guys coming in with their arms and legs blown off, with their bowels hanging out, with gray matter hanging out of there. I mean, horrible injuries, burns from head to toe. So I felt like I was making a difference. I felt like for the first time in my career, I felt like I was really saving lives. And so it was professionally satisfying. It was horrible to see these young men, most of them in their early 20s, some of them not even 20, some who died and some who had these horrible injuries that would basically be with them for the rest of their lives. So it was kind of mixed emotions.
How does your psyche handle that?
Well, I'd been an emergency medicine physician for a while, so I'd kind of already learned to deal with people dying, and being involved in that process.
But wait, even early on, when you're going and assisting with autopsies, was that just natural curiosity, or you just seemed like you kind of have a shell that you don't let those sort of things bother you? Has that been since you were a kid that you were like that?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it never really did bother me, to be honest with you. I just saw it as part of the job. And yeah, so I don't know. I think you have to be that kind of person to be an emergency medicine physician in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly to be a combat physician in a combat zone, you're going to see that kind of stuff, and you just have to. You have to deal with it, and I just always saw it as part of my job, and I didn't let it get to me. I didn't let it bother me. I mean, it's upsetting sometimes, but I didn't let it bother me. I remember the first time a young man, he was probably 21 years old, died when I was in Iraq, and we worked on this guy for hours and hours. I mean, for probably 3 hours, we're operating on him, trying to stop the bleeding in his pelvis. He'd been hit by an IED, and he had fragmentation all in his chest and his abdomen, his pelvis. He was bleeding, and the surgeons were trying their best to figure out where the bleeding was coming from. It was in his pelvis, and it was just, his pelvis would just filled full of blood, and they would suction it all out and try to, stop the bleeding and just fill full of blood again. And we were giving this guy just multiple, units of blood. I think we gave this guy something like 32 units of blood. And we worked so hard to save this kid. And eventually, after about three and a half hours, he died on the table. And that was pretty traumatic for my entire team. We had just got there. We'd only been in Iraq for a few days. And and I was the last person to talk to him because I was at the head of the bed. I was the one that intubated him, put the tube in, the breathing tube in. When we first got him, when he came in, he was awake and alert. And the last thing he said to me was like, am I going to be okay? And I said, we're going to put you to sleep right now. You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. And then, 3 hours later, this kid died on the table. And that was kind of hard, but, you deal with it.
Wow. How did you get to be the White House doctor?
Well, that happened while I was in Iraq, and I don't. A lot of it's being in the right place at the right time, I think. And I was in Iraq. I didn't even know there was a White House physician. I didn't even know that job existed. And it turns out there were 6 physicians at the White House: 2 Army, 2 Navy, and 2 Air Force. They were all family practice or internal medicine docs. And the White House decided during the Bush administration that they needed an emergency medicine doc at the White House, which makes sense. And by the time I left, they were all pretty much all emergency medicine docs. But so they reached out to the emergency medicine specialty leader, the guy that controls my community emergency medicine in the military, and they just got packages from the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force for an ER doc. And my specialty leader threw my name in the hat without me even knowing about it. And after I'd been in Iraq for a few months, I was checking an old email account that I didn't even really wasn't obligated to check anymore from my previous command. I was just kind of keeping up with the gossip at the Naval Hospital. I had a Marine Corps account that was my main account, but I logged onto this account and I saw there was an email in there that had been in there for about 10 days, and it said, you've been, selected to apply for a job at the White House. Please have your CV, your personal statement, your last 6 performance reports, your security information, your official photo. There was a whole list of stuff that it wanted, and it said you have all this stuff in. By the time I saw it, it said by the end of the week, by Friday. So I had about 5 days to get all this done. So I didn't think it was possible. I wasn't even going to do it, to be quite honest with you. I called my wife that night, and I told her about it. She's like, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, Jane, there's no way I can get all this stuff done. I'm out in the middle of the desert, and I'm not going to do." She said, "Well, you should do it anyways. Just even if you don't get it all done, it's important maybe down the road for you to at least say you were considered for the job. So you should go through the process and try to get it in." So I did, and I actually got it all in. My package wasn't like it was supposed to be, because I was generating most of it out in the middle of nowhere. But I got it in, and then I didn't hear anything for about 2.5 months, and I kind of thought, well, somebody else already got the job. I'm just out here in the middle of nowhere, and I haven't heard about it. I'd asked my detailer, the guy that controls my community, said, "I don't know, we passed everything to the White House. I don't know what's going on. I've lost sight of it." And then I stopped checking that account, and this was about 2.5 months in. I checked that account one day again. It had been another week or so since I checked it, and there was an email in there saying, "Hey, you've been selected as one of 3 people to interview for a job at the White House. Please be in D.C. in 5 days," right? So I had 5 days. Well, I thought, well, this is great, but this is where the road ends. There's no way I'm going to be in D.C. in 5 days. I'm here in Iraq. And so luckily, circumstances, the commanding general for all of the Marines out in the Al-Anbar province and all of Iraq at the time had been a military aide for Bush 41, the guy that carries the nuclear football. And at the White House, the physician, the military aide that carries the football, and the Secret Service agent that's in charge of the detail, the 3 of them are what they call the emergency action team. They're together 24/7, 365, always just a few steps away from the president. So this guy had worked closely with the doctor for a couple of years. He knew exactly the job I was being offered. I didn't really even know what the job entailed, but he knew, and he knew it was an opportunity I was never going to get again. So he called me in his office. He said, "Tell me what's going on." I told him. He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, sir, there's no way I'm going to be in D.C. in 5 days. I'll try to do a video teleconference or maybe a phone interview. I don't know how competitive I'm going to be, but I'm going to give it my best shot." And he said, "Stand by." He picked the phone up. He called the air boss, the guy that controls all the air assets in the area. And the last thing he said when he hung up is he's like, "I want his butt out of here by sunset." He hung the phone up and he said, "Go pack your crap, you're leaving." And so he flew another emergency medicine doc in from the other side of Iraq to backfill me that day. I went back to my hooch, got my sea bag, threw some stuff in it, went to the flight line, got on a helicopter, flew to Baghdad, got on a C-5 cargo plane full of broken helicopters, flew back to Cherry Point, North Carolina, got a rental car, drove back to D.C., kind of in a panic. Supposed to be at the White House the next day, supposed to interview 2 days in a business suit and 1 day in a uniform. I'd lost 40 pounds out there. So I ran down to the men's warehouse, bought a brand new suit, gave them my sob story, begged them to tailor it for me on the spot. They did. I got back in my rental car, drove to D.C., interviewed for the job for 3 days. At the end of the 3 days, they told me I got the job. I went back to Iraq, finished my tour for 4 months, and came straight from Iraq to the White House, and that was early 2006. I was a brand new junior physician for George W. Bush.
We'll pick up that conversation, what it was like to be a White House doctor for 3 presidents, correct?
Yeah, right.
We'll try to get some information on the presidents from you.
All right.
I know from HIPAA laws you probably can't divulge much, but stay with us. An interesting conversation with Ronny Jackson. We're also going to be talking about the wokeness in the military and what we on the Armed Services Committee have done to combat that, and how do we get people back to believing in America again, Ronny. I really want to talk about that. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to Mark Alford's America, where we give you a behind-the-scenes look at Washington, let you meet some of the fascinating people that I work with here in D.C. and folks who are helping shape our great nation. Dr. Ronny Jackson is a second-term congressman from Texas. He is an admiral, and we were talking about you getting the job as a White House doctor. You served for 3 presidents. Who were those 3?
George Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump.
So you're their like personal physician. I mean, you see every inch of their body.
Yeah.
Of course, you've been in wartime, emergency services. You've seen just about everything. But when you are there with the President of the United States in that sort of setting, how do you handle that? I mean, that is an awesome responsibility.
Well, yeah, it really is. I mean, your job is to make sure they have everything they need, and to make sure they're healthy and safe. And you work closely with the Secret Service. You're basically part of the Secret Service as far they provide the physical protection, but you're part of that as well. So you're with the president always. I mean, I myself or one of the doctors that were assigned to me that worked for me were with the president 24/7, 365. You're always with him, whether he's on the helicopter or he's on Air Force One. He's at the hotel. He's in a hold room somewhere. He's backstage about to. You're always just a few steps away, and so it's a great opportunity. You just you get to know the president obviously very very well because you're with them all the time. So I had really close personal relationships with all the presidents. It's just part of the job. And
even though you didn't agree with Barack Obama on a lot of issues.
I didn't agree with anything that the Obama administration did politically, but I was on active duty. I was an active duty.
So he's your commander-in-chief.
He's commander-in-chief. It's no different than the pilot that flies Air Force One or the Secret Service agents that protect him. In that particular role, you don't have a political opinion. You're there to take care of the president and the office of the president, and you keep your political opinions to yourself. And I did that for the entire 14 years that I was at the White House. And I think I surprised some people when I got out and I ended up getting into politics in particular. I think President Obama was pretty surprised. I think he knew all along that I was conservative. He knew what the part of the country I came from, and he knew I was a Republican. But I never shared my political opinions with anybody. And then, of course, I got out, and I'm one of the most outspoken conservative members of Congress, and so we don't have much of a relationship anymore. Myself and President Obama, but
you got quite close to President Trump.
I did, yeah, and I still stay. I'm still close to President Trump, and I talk to him on a regular basis, and still spend time with him. I still see and talk to President Bush every now and then. He was a great boss as well. But yeah, I did get really close to President Trump in particular, and I spent a lot of time with him as well. Yeah.
Without getting in too much detail, I've heard you talk in a little bit about President Trump, and he is a lot healthier than he would appear.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it drove the press and the far left crazy. That I didn't announce that he was not fit to be president. Physically or mentally, and to be honest with you. I mean, I briefed his physical early on in his presidency, and that was kind of the day that I got the Trump stamp. I mean, we can go into on another show, go into some detail about how that led me to where I'm at right now, but. He's in great health. I mean, his diet's horrible, and he doesn't exercise. But the man's never drank or smoked his entire life. So you pick your battles, you pick your vices, I guess. But I laid out all the objective data. His cardiac function was in the top 10% for his age. His cholesterol, all his labs. I mean, everything. I mean, he's very, very healthy for considering his age. I laid that all out for the press, and it just drove him crazy that I didn't, say that he wasn't healthy. But
Looking from the outside, I'm not going to ask you to give a diagnosis on President Biden, but what you see in who he was even 6 months, a year ago. What do you think about the overall health of the President of the United States?
Well, I
right
don't
now?
think it's good, and I don't think you even have to be a physician anymore to see that. I think everybody in the country can see that firsthand. This is a man you can go back and, he's been in politics for 40, 50 years, and you have just endless tape of, him as a senator and as a vice president or whatever, and you can see he's always been prone to gaffes, but these are different. These aren't gaffes anymore. He's confused, he's lost, he shuffles when he walks, he slurs his speech. I mean, he's got legitimate cognitive issues. Like I said, I'm not giving him a diagnosis. I'm not saying he has Parkinson's or multi-infarct dementia or Alzheimer's or anything else. I'm just saying he has some serious cognitive decline related to his age.
And how does that affect our standing on the world stage? And as we deal with this on the Armed Services Committee, we're dealing with a lot of issues: the threat from communist China, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The world is looking at the United States of America.
Well, it's very dangerous for us. We've traditionally been the leader, and I've witnessed that firsthand. 14 years at the White House on how we go overseas, and people will just follow our lead because we're the United States of America, and we just do. We've lost that now. I've been overseas, and I've talked to colleagues over there from other countries that that I served with in the military or that that are in. That are in politics there, and it's embarrassing. I mean, it doesn't inspire confidence in our allies, and it doesn't inspire, it doesn't give our adversaries pause or fear. I mean, your adversaries need to respect you, and we've lost that respect.
Could part of that lack of respect also be in the direction the military has gone? With the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, the CRT, the drag queen shows, the digital ambassadors. Talk about that and what we're doing on the Armed Services Committee to try to combat that.
Well, you weren't here the last term, but the last term we were in the minority here, and so we didn't control the agenda in any of the committees that we have, and certainly not in the Armed Services Committee, which I was on. So all we talked about, every single hearing that the Democrats had something to do with CRT, DEI, transgender issues, pronouns. I mean, that's just, they didn't care about anything if it didn't have something to do with the woke social agenda, and they were using the military as their own special little experiment, their own little woke experiment, and inserting all this stuff in the military. So what we're doing now that we have the majority in the House, is we're systematically going through the military. We're trying to take our military back because it's made us weak. I mean, it's killed us with recruiting and retention. People don't want to go in the military anymore because it's not it's not what it used to be. It's not the place you serve your country like you used to. So we're going in and we're removing all of that. And so that's what we're doing with this National Defense Authorization Act that we're voting on today and tomorrow, and that's on the floor of the House right now. Is we're recapturing that. We're getting all of that DEI, all of that CRT, all of those social programs out of our military. And then the other thing they did too that we're getting out of there is a lot of the Green New Deal stuff, just vast amounts of money that they're spending on their Green New Deal in the military. None of these things make our country strong. None of these things make our country safe. We need to be focused on one thing. We need to be focused on a strong military that can defeat China when that day comes, because that's our main adversary. And believe me, they don't care about any of this stuff. They're not spending any time, any effort, any money on all this garbage that we've been spending our last 2 years on. So we've got to get our military back, and we've got to make it strong again. We got to start focusing on what makes us lethal and not this social garbage.
What do we need to do to get our young people interested in joining the military? How do we rebuild patriotism in our country?
Well, that's a bigger issue, I think. I mean, I think you start by, returning the military to what it's supposed to be, the vehicle by which we defend this country. And I think people are naturally attracted to serving in that environment. I know I was. But we have a bigger issue in this country, with our youth. We've, in my mind, kind of lost an entire generation because of some of the woke stuff that's been in our schools that we're just finding out. We didn't find out a lot of it until COVID hit, and then we were exposed to some of the curriculum, that was out there. And we always knew it was happening in our university system, that they were trying to brainwash our kids, and teach them that this is not a great place to live, that there are better places around the world to live, that America's a bad place. And we knew they were doing that at the university system. What we didn't know is that was happening in early education too, and so I think that there's a lot of kids that have been exposed to that for years and years now, and we've got to turn that around, and that's just a bigger issue for our society.
Ronny, thank you so much.
Thank you,
I
Mark.
appreciate you. I appreciate your dedication, your service to America, and helping mentor me here. This is not an easy job, learning just the language that we use in armed services in the military. I mean, this is a learning ground for me, and I'm really trying to catch up fast so I can be an effective member on the House Armed Services Committee. But I appreciate you.
Well, you're doing a great job, and it's
Thank
an
you.
honor to serve with you, and thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for joining us for Mark Alford's America. We'll talk again next week, folks. Remember, I believe in you. I believe that our best days are still ahead of us as a nation. I believe in America. God bless. We'll see you.